She rescued his son from drowning. The Mafia boss held her tight. You won't go. The river ran dark and slow, reflecting the silver light of the half-moon. Somewhere, a distant bell tolled, echoing across the empty alleys. In this city, power did not always belong to kings or queens. It belonged to those who dared to seize it, and few dared more than Lucian Dravic. Lucian stood at the river's edge, his coat brushing the wet stones. Even in the night, his presence was commanding. He did not speak often, but when he did, people listened, afraid and reverent all at once. Tonight, however, fear was replaced by panic. His son Marco, a small boy of 8, had vanished near the riverbank, and rumors said he might have fallen in. Lucian's sharp eyes scanned the water, searching. A shadow moved beneath the moonlight, a splash. Without thinking, he began to run, heart pounding, knowing that seconds could mean life or death. And then she appeared, Ilara. She was a healer, known in whispers among the city's poorer districts. Her hands could mend wounds that medicine alone could not touch, and her heart had no fear for those in danger. Tonight she was by the river, her hair damp with mist, her eyes wide and determined. Marco was thrashing in the water, his small arms flailing against the current. Without a second thought, she dove in. The cold hit her like fire, but she kept moving. Every stroke brought her closer to the boy. His face was pale, fear and water mingling, but her hands reached him, grasped him firmly. She pulled him to shore, coughing as the icy water left her trembling. Lucian arrived moments later, his coat soaked from the chase, and his eyes locked on the stranger who held his son. She cradled Marco with a quiet determination that made Lucian pause. "You saved him," Lucian said, voice low, controlled, yet trembling with a mix of awe and disbelief. Ilara looked up, her own breath ragged. "He was drowning," she said simply, placing Marco on the riverbank. "I couldn't just leave him." Lucian's gaze sharpened. Every step he took toward her carried the weight of command, the kind of presence that could bend others to their will. "And who are you to decide that?" he demanded. Ilara met his gaze without fear. "Someone who won't stand by when a child needs help," she replied, her voice steady despite the chill in the air. The boy looked at both of them, shivering but safe. Marco's small hand reached toward Lucian, and for the first time in many nights, the Mafia boss's heart clenched. He was used to controlling the streets, controlling people, but never this, never the helplessness of a parent when his child was in danger. Lucian stepped closer, reaching toward Ilara, almost instinctively. "You won't go," he said, his voice firm yet layered with something deeper, a mix of fear, anger, and an emotion he did not understand. Ilara stiffened, realizing the power radiating from him. I have to leave," she whispered, hesitant but unbroken. "No," he said again, stepping closer, his hand brushing hers, the contact light but binding. "You stay, for him." She looked at Marco, who clung to her side, shivering, innocent, trusting. She looked back at Lucian and saw something else. A man haunted by the shadows of his own life, a man who was dangerous, yes, but also in pain. Something in her stirred, a mixture of fear and curiosity that she could not explain. The river, calm once more, seemed to hold its breath, but the night was not finished. From the depths of the water, a ripple moved against the current. A shadow rose slowly, dark and unseen by any but the keenest eyes. It lingered at the edge of the riverbank, watching the boy, the woman, and the man with silent intent. Ilara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold water. She looked around but saw nothing, dismissing it as her imagination. Yet the feeling would not leave her, a silent warning that this night had changed everything. Lucian knelt beside Marco, brushing wet hair from his forehead. "Are you hurt?" he asked, voice rougher than usual. Marco shook his head, but his small hand pressed against Lucian's chest. I'm okay," he said, voice trembling. "She saved me." Ilara's heart softened, and for a moment the tension between her and Lucian eased, replaced by a fragile silence that spoke louder than words. But the calm would not last. Lucian rose, towering over Alara, his eyes scanning hers. "You have courage," he said, almost as if he were admitting a secret. "And yet you are foolish. Do you know what it means to be near me? The danger you risk is more than you can imagine." Alara met his gaze, unwavering. "I know danger," she replied softly, "but I also know what it means to save a life. I wouldn't turn away." Lucian's lips pressed into a thin line. He had always commanded obedience, respect, and fear. But this woman, this healer, she demanded nothing but the courage of her own heart. And for the first time he felt something he could not control, admiration and a spark of longing. The wind rose, carrying the sound of the city at night, distant footsteps, the soft clatter of horse hooves, the echo of bells. Yet here at the river's edge, time seemed to stop. Two lives had collided, his hardened by power and shadow, hers soft yet unyielding, full of light in a world that had known only darkness. And then the ripple returned. The shadow in the water stirred again, darker now, and the air seemed to tighten around them. Marco's small eyes widened. It's back," he whispered. Alara felt a shiver run through her spine. The water darkened, not with reflection but with something unseen. She instinctively stepped between the boy and the river, her arms outstretched, ready to defend. Lucian's hand found hers again, firm, grounding, unyielding. "Stay behind me," he said, voice low and steady. His eyes scanned the river, assessing the threat that only his instincts could perceive. The shadow rose further, a dark shape curling like smoke over the surface. The night seemed to grow heavier, pressing in on them, demanding a reckoning. Alara's heart pounded. She did not know what this presence was, only that it was drawn to Marco, drawn to the bond of protection forming between the boy and those who cared for him. And she knew instinctively that her life had changed forever. Lucian's gaze met hers. "You saved him once," he said, a tremor in his otherwise steady voice. "But if you stay, you may have to save him again, and this time it may not be just his life at stake." Alara swallowed, feeling the weight of the words and the pull of something unspoken. There was power in him, darkness in him, yet she also sensed a vulnerability, a hidden grief that no one else had seen. And she felt herself drawn to it, as if some unseen thread had tied their fates together at the river's edge. The night held its breath. The shadow rose, dark and silent, and the river whispered of dangers yet to come. And in that moment, Lucian's hand tightened on hers, binding her in a way neither of them fully understood. "You won't go," he said again, the command a promise, a warning and something more. Alara looked down at Marco, then back at him, and for the first time she hesitated. The choice was no longer simple. To leave would be to abandon a life. To stay would be to step into a world of shadows, power, and danger she had never known. The river's surface rippled one last time as the shadow vanished beneath the water, leaving a silence heavier than before. And in that silence the night seemed to whisper. Their story had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. The mansion loomed ahead like a fortress carved from stone and shadow. Its walls were tall, cold, and unyielding, reflecting the silver moonlight. Mist rolled along the grounds, curling around the statues of long-forgotten ancestors. Within, the halls whispered secrets, and the air held a chill that seemed to seep into the bones. This was Lucian Dravic's domain, a place where power and fear walked hand in hand, and yet tonight the usual rules felt fragile. Alara followed closely behind Lucian, her heart still pounding from the river. Marco clutched her hand tightly, shivering but too tired to speak. The warmth of the mansion's lamps did little to comfort the chill left by the river's dark water. Lucian walked beside her, silent and imposing, his gaze sharp as it swept over the corridors and shadowed corners. Every step he took carried authority, the floors seemed to obey him. "You will stay here," Lucian said without turning his head. The words were firm, unyielding, but beneath them lingered something else, concern, worry, and a shadow of trust he had rarely given to anyone. "I can't stay," Alara replied softly. Her voice trembled not from fear but from the awareness of the power that surrounded her. I'm not meant to live like this under orders behind walls. I'm a healer, not a prisoner. Lucian stopped. His coat swished around his boots as he turned, and the sheer intensity of his presence made her step back. You saved my son, he said, his voice quieter now, almost measured. For that you must stay, not for me but for him. The city does not forgive weakness, and neither do I. Ilara's eyes softened as she looked at Marco. The boy clung to her side, trembling but trusting, his small face pale and wet from the river. I will protect him, she whispered. Her heart beat faster, not with fear, but with a sense of responsibility she could not ignore. Lucian nodded once, his jaw tight. He studied her for a long moment, as if weighing the balance between trust and instinct. Then he turned and led them through a massive iron door. Beyond it lay the mansion's inner halls, dark and silent. The walls were lined with portraits of stern-faced ancestors, eyes painted so sharply they seemed to follow every movement. "This is where we live," Lucian said simply. His voice echoed faintly against the high ceilings. "And here nothing is as it seems. Shadows speak. Walls have ears. Trust is earned, not given." Ilara's gaze wandered over the grand hall. The chandeliers were dim, their crystals catching the faint light and scattering it into patterns that reminded her of stars. Tapestries hung along the walls, depicting battles, ceremonies, and strange creatures she could not name. Some moved in the flickering candlelight, creating illusions that made her stomach twist with unease. "And the curse?" she asked quietly, testing the air. She had heard whispers from the city streets about the darkness that clung to Lucian's family, tales of lost heirs, unexplained deaths, and shadows that could not be chased away. Lucian's eyes darkened. "You speak of things you do not understand," he said, a shadow passing over his features. "There are forces here older than the city itself. I have fought them all my life. Some I control, some control me." Ilara swallowed, feeling the weight of his words. Yet beneath the fear, a flicker of curiosity stirred. She had always been drawn to life in its rawest form, to mysteries that others ignored or feared. And here, in the heart of Lucian's world, she sensed a story unfolding that was far larger than any she had ever known. The boy Marco had already fallen asleep, curled up in a soft chair near a fire. His small chest rose and fell with slow, even breaths, oblivious to the tension filling the hall. Ilara knelt beside him, brushing a strand of wet hair from his forehead. Her fingers lingered, careful and gentle. He was alive, and for now safe, a fragile light in the darkness surrounding them. Lucian watched her, silent, from the edge of the hall. His gaze was sharp, but something softened in the corners of his eyes, a vulnerability he rarely allowed himself to feel. He moved closer, speaking without preamble. "You are brave," he said quietly, "and foolish." Ilara looked up at him, meeting his gaze. "I save lives," she said simply, "even when it's dangerous, even when I don't know the cost." Lucian's lips pressed into a thin line. He wanted to command her, to bend her will as he had done with so many others. Yet standing before him, she resisted without anger, without fear, with only quiet conviction. And in that resistance, he felt something he could not name, a pull that made his chest tighten. The mansion was not quiet for long. Shadows moved along the walls, almost imperceptible at first, twisting and curling in patterns that were unnatural. Candles flickered and went out in strange corners, leaving dark patches that seemed to breathe. Ilara noticed the movement, her healer's instincts tingling. Something was wrong, though she could not yet see it. Lucian's voice broke the silence. "Do you feel it?" he asked, sharp and low. "The air shifts when it comes." Ilara nodded. "Something watches, but I don't know what it is." Lucian's expression hardened. "It is part of my life, part of my bloodline, and now part of yours." He did not elaborate, yet his words left a weight in her chest, heavy and foreboding. Days passed, though the mansion had no clear measure of time. The halls were long and winding, and each room seemed to carry its own secrets. Ilara was given a small suite, modest but comfortable, and there she tended to Marco, who grew stronger with each passing day. Yet the shadows never left. They lingered, curling at the edges of her vision, whispering in a language she could not understand. Lucian's presence remained constant. He watched her with sharp, calculating eyes, sometimes appearing silently behind her, sometimes sitting in a distant chair, observing without a word. Marco felt safe around both of them, though the boy would glance occasionally at the dark corners, sensing the same unease that Ilara felt. One night, as rain fell against the tall windows, Ilara wandered the mansion, drawn by a quiet, irresistible force. A corridor she had never seen before stretched ahead, its walls lined with books and artifacts. At the end, a heavy wooden door called to her. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the handle. There was something behind it, a whisper of the past, a secret waiting to be uncovered. Lucian appeared silently beside her. "You should not enter," he said, voice low but urgent. "Some doors are locked for a reason." "I need to know," Ilara replied. "Something is here, something tied to the curse, to your family, to Marco." He studied her for a long moment, then finally nodded. "Very well," he said, "but beware. Some knowledge carries a price, and once seen it cannot be unseen." The door creaked open, revealing a hidden chamber. Dust lay thick on the floor, and the air smelled of age and magic. Books with cracked spines and yellowed pages lined the walls. In the center of the room lay a stone pedestal, holding an ancient scroll. Ilara stepped forward, drawn to it like a moth to flame. The scroll spoke of a curse that had followed Lucian's bloodline for generations, a darkness tied to ambition, power, and fear. It whispered that the curse could only be broken by a choice of sacrifice, courage, or love. Her heart pounded. The implications were clear. Saving Marco had bound her into this story, this danger. She could leave, or she could step fully into a world she did not understand. Lucian's voice startled her. "It is worse than you think," he said, stepping closer. "This curse is patient. It waits, it watches, and it tests. It will not forgive weakness." Ilara swallowed, feeling the gravity of the truth. "Then we fight it," she said quietly, "together." For the first time, Lucian's expression softened completely. He did not speak, only nodded, a rare acknowledgement of trust. Yet in the shadows, unseen and patient, something stirred. The mansion seemed to hold its breath, as if aware that the balance of power had shifted. The night stretched on, silent except for the distant roll of thunder and the soft breathing of a boy finally asleep. Ilara and Lucian stood together, an uneasy alliance forming, tied by responsibility, danger, and an emotion neither of them fully understood. And beyond the walls, in the mist-shrouded streets, a shadow lingered, waiting, watching, and remembering. The curse had been disturbed. The game had begun. And in the silence, one truth remained clear. Neither of them would leave unchanged. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a pale silver glow over the mansion's gardens. Rain had fallen earlier, leaving the paths slick with wet leaves, and the scent of earth and flowers lingered in the air. Fireflies floated among the hedges, tiny sparks that blinked like stars fallen to the ground. The garden was beautiful, almost unreal, yet it carried the same sense of danger that pervaded the mansion, a quiet reminder that shadows could hide in the most luminous places. Ilara walked along the stone paths, her cloak wrapped tightly around her. Marco had been sent to bed earlier, tired from his near drowning and the strange energy that seemed to cling to the mansion. She had insisted on checking the garden, drawn by a restlessness she could not explain. She was not alone. Lucian followed silently, his footsteps muffled against the wet stones. His coat was damp from the rain, and his expression was unreadable. Yet in the quiet of the night, Ilara could sense his watchfulness, the way he moved as if every shadow could hide a threat. "You should not wander here alone," Lucian said, his voice low but firm. "I am not alone," she replied softly, glancing at him. "You are here." He did not answer immediately. Instead, he watched the fireflies flicker in the mist, the way they moved in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. "You feel it too," he said after a moment. "The air changes, the shadows move." Alara nodded. "I cannot explain it, but something is alive here. And it is drawn to Marco." Lucian's eyes darkened. "It has always been. The curse, it follows him because of me, because of my bloodline. And now, because of you, it knows new life, new strength." She looked up at him, meeting his gaze. In the soft moonlight, the lines of his face were sharp, but softened by emotion she could not name. Fear, grief, and something closer to longing danced in his eyes. She felt her own heart respond, though she could not understand why. They walked further into the garden, past statues of stone lions and angels whose faces seemed almost alive in the moonlight. Water from a fountain shimmered, reflecting the silver sky. Alara felt the pull of magic here, subtle yet undeniable. It whispered through the leaves, through the cool night air, and wrapped around her like a living thing. "Do you believe in fate?" she asked quietly, her voice almost lost among the rustling leaves. Lucian stopped, turning to her, his eyes searching. "I do not believe in luck," he said, "but I have learned that choices bind us as much as blood. Every action has a consequence, and every connection, even one as fragile as ours, can change the course of everything." Alara felt her chest tighten. She had never met anyone like him. So powerful, so dangerous, yet capable of honesty few could ever glimpse. "Then perhaps we are bound," she said softly. A silence fell between them, filled only by the faint splash of the fountain and the distant hum of the city. The night seemed to watch, waiting, as if it knew that their conversation had shifted something fundamental between them. Suddenly, Marco's laughter echoed from the edge of the garden. He had sneaked back out, curious and fearless. "Look," he shouted. "The fireflies follow me." Alara and Lucian both turned. The boy's hands were raised, and dozens of fireflies circled him, glowing brighter as if responding to his joy. But then something changed. One of the shadows that clung to the mansion stirred in the corner of the garden. It moved like smoke, curling along the ground, heading toward Marco with silent intent. Alara felt a chill run down her spine. "Marco, come back," she shouted, stepping forward. Lucian was already moving, faster than any human should be able to move. In a single stride, he reached Marco, scooping him into his arms. "Do not touch him," Lucian commanded, his voice sharp, slicing through the night. The shadow recoiled at his presence but did not vanish. It twisted and shimmered, taking a vaguely humanoid shape, dark and silent. It circled the fountain, its eyes glinting with an unnatural light. Alara stepped closer, heart racing. "What is it?" she whispered. Lucian's jaw tightened. "A fragment of the curse," he said. "It has grown stronger, it tests us." Alara felt a pull in her chest, a mixture of fear and determination. "Then we fight it," she said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. Lucian glanced at her, surprise flickering across his face. "You would face it with me?" "Yes," she replied simply. "I will protect Marco, and I will stand by your side." For the first time, Lucian allowed himself a small, rare smile. "Then you may survive this night," he said, "but the curse does not forgive mistakes." The shadow moved closer, and the fireflies around Marco scattered. Alara felt a surge of instinct. She raised her hands, not knowing what she would do, but hoping her presence alone could hold it back. The garden seemed to respond, the wind rose, and the leaves rustled like whispers of encouragement. Lucian moved to her side. "Focus," he said. "It feeds on fear. Do not give it that." Alara closed her eyes for a moment, centering herself. She reached for a memory of warmth, of light, of compassion, and held it in her heart. Slowly, the shadow recoiled, hissing like a snake disturbed. Lucian's hands glowed faintly, a power he rarely revealed, and he struck toward the shadow. The air rippled with energy, and the figure dissipated, vanishing into the night. Marco giggled, clapping his small hands. "You did it," he exclaimed, unaware of the danger he had just faced. Alara exhaled, feeling her knees weaken slightly. Lucian caught her before she fell, steadying her. "You are stronger than I thought," he said, his voice soft but intense. Not many could have faced that. She looked up at him, breathing heavily. "I didn't do it alone." He studied her, and in his gaze was a mixture of respect, curiosity, and something deeper, something he had not allowed himself to feel in years. "Perhaps," he said. "But you are bound to this world now more than you know. The curse is patient. It will test you again." Alara's heart sank slightly, but she held her ground. "Then we will face it together," she said. The night stretched on, the garden calm once more. Yet both of them knew that the peace was temporary. The mansion had secrets still, and the curse lingered in corners unseen. They walked back toward the main house, side by side, the unspoken tension between them heavier than the mist around their feet. As they entered the grand hall, Lucian spoke again, his voice quiet. "There is more to this curse than just shadows and tests. It is tied to my family, to choices made long before we were born, and it will not be satisfied until it has demanded its due." Alara glanced at him. "And what do you want, Lucian?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He stopped and turned to her, his gaze piercing. "I do not know," he admitted, the words unusual from a man who rarely revealed weakness. "Perhaps I want to be free, free from the shadows, free from the weight of my own mistakes." Her hand brushed against his, almost accidentally. She felt a warmth in the contact, a connection she could not deny. For a moment, time seemed to pause, and the world outside the mansion faded away. Two people bound by circumstance and duty stood together, hearts beating in quiet rhythm against the darkness. Then a sudden chill swept the hall. Candles flickered, shadows stretching unnaturally along the walls. Alara felt it again, that familiar warning she had felt at the river. The curse was not done. It was watching, waiting, and testing. Lucian's eyes narrowed. "It senses strength," he said, "and it knows we are not alone." Alara nodded, fear mingling with resolve. She understood now that their bond was more than chance. They were allies, protectors, and perhaps something more, a spark of hope against the darkness that had haunted this family for generations. The mansion seemed to sigh, the walls holding the echoes of past mistakes, of losses, and of choices that had long ago shaped the present. And as Alara and Lucian stood together, she knew that the next test would come soon, and it would demand more than courage. It would demand trust, sacrifice, and perhaps even the unspoken strength of love. The fireflies outside blinked like stars. The rain began again in a soft, steady rhythm, and the garden awaited them. The dance of fire and water had begun, and neither of them could turn away. The first light of dawn crept slowly over the city, brushing the tall buildings and the mansion's spires with a soft, golden glow. It was rare to see the sun after nights so long and heavy, nights filled with shadows, secrets, and fear. But the mansion, silent in the early morning, seemed to breathe differently now, lighter, almost as if it had been holding its own breath in anticipation. Alara stood on the balcony, the cool morning air brushing against her face. The events of the past days still weighed on her mind. She had faced darkness, saved Marco, and walked the fine line between fear and courage. But she knew the final test was coming. The curse, ancient and relentless, had not yet released its hold. It waited for the moment to strike, to demand its due. Lucian emerged quietly from the hall behind her. His coat was dark against the soft morning light, but there was a softness in his gaze she had not seen before. The shadow of a man hardened by power and fear was still there, but it had shifted. Perhaps, in part, it was because of her presence, her courage, her unwavering heart. "You are awake," he said, voice low, almost hesitant. "I was waiting," Alara replied softly. "The curse, I can feel it, it's near." He nodded. "It will come, and when it does, we face it together. There is no other way." The air shifted suddenly, colder now, heavier. The wind picked up, rustling leaves and lifting mist from the gardens below. Shadows stretched along the mansion walls, curling unnaturally, forming shapes that made the hair on Alara's arms stand. She felt the pull, the presence of something powerful, something ancient, waiting for the right moment to strike. "Stay behind me," Lucian said, a command that carried weight and concern in equal measure. Alara shook her head. "No, I fight with you." For a long moment he said nothing. Then slowly he lowered his hand. "Very well," he said, almost in a whisper. "Together." They descended the spiral staircase into the mansion's grand hall, the place where the curse had first whispered its threats. Marco slept peacefully in a small chair near the fireplace, unaware of the storm that was approaching. Alara's heart ached at the thought of him in danger again, and she clenched her fists, drawing strength from her desire to protect him. The shadow appeared suddenly, like smoke curling through the cracks of the walls. It was taller now, its edges flickering as if the darkness itself was alive. It moved toward Marco, slow but deliberate, every step a threat, every breath an accusation. Lucian stepped forward, placing himself between the boy and the shadow. His hands glowed faintly with energy, a power he had rarely used openly. "You will not touch him," he said, voice steady, though his chest heaved slightly from the effort of holding back the force of the curse. Alara moved beside him, feeling the energy in the room. She drew in a deep breath and focused on the warmth inside her, the courage, the compassion, the desire to protect life. She felt the shadows react, hesitating as if unsure of how to approach a heart so steadfast. "Focus," Lucian whispered, noticing her hesitation. "Do not let fear guide you. Stand with me." Alara nodded. "I am with you." The shadow surged forward, a dark, swirling figure with eyes that glowed like embers. Its presence pressed against the walls, filling the room with a cold, suffocating weight. Alara and Lucian moved as one, a combination of light and power, courage and strength. They stood together, shoulders squared, hearts aligned, ready to face the darkness. Lucian extended his hands, his power striking the shadow with a force that made the air vibrate. The figure shrieked, a sound that chilled the bones, but it did not dissipate entirely. Alara stepped forward, placing her hand on the glowing energy between them. She felt it pulse, dangerous yet responsive. Slowly, carefully, she added her own force, not of magic, but of will, of heart, of protection. The room trembled as the two forces merged. Light and shadow clashed, swirling violently, a storm of energy contained within the grand hall. Marco stirred but did not wake, as if protected by an invisible barrier. "You can do this," Lucian said, voice grating against the wind, yet calm in its certainty. "Do not give it fear. Give it courage. Give it life." Alara's heart pounded. She closed her eyes and reached deep into herself, letting every shred of love, care, and bravery pour into the energy surrounding them. The shadow shrieked again, twisting, flailing, and then slowly, inch by inch, it began to weaken. Lucian's hands glowed brighter. "Now," he said, and together they pushed forward, their combined strength pressing against the darkness. The shadow screamed one last time and vanished, leaving only silence in its wake. The room was still. The air smelled of rain and earth, warm and alive. Light returned to the grand hall, bright yet gentle, casting away the oppressive weight that had lingered for so long. Alara sank to her knees, exhausted, but her heart lifted at the knowledge that the curse had been pushed back for now. Lucian knelt beside her, placing a hand over hers. His touch was steadying, grounding, a quiet affirmation that they had survived together. "You were incredible," he said softly, his voice layered with respect and something more admiration, and perhaps the stirrings of something deeper. Alara looked up at him, her own chest rising and falling with relief and exhaustion. "We were incredible," she replied. "Together," Lucian studied her, his eyes lingering longer than necessary. "I am not used to partnership," he admitted, voice low, "but I think I could learn." She smiled faintly, feeling a warmth she had not known in years. "Sometimes the strongest people need someone to stand beside them," she said. Lucian's expression softened. For a moment, The hardened facade of the Mafia lord faded, replaced by the man who had loved and lost, who had feared, and who had finally allowed himself to feel hope. Outside, the first true light of dawn broke through the clouds. The city seemed to awaken with it, the streets glistening, the rivers sparkling. Shadows fled from the corners of the mansion, retreating from the morning sun. It was a new day, a fresh start, and the first time in many years that the mansion felt alive with possibility rather than fear. Marco stirred, opening his eyes. He looked up at Alara and Lucian and smiled, the innocence of a child untouched by darkness. "Did we win?" he asked, his small voice filled with wonder. Alara bent down and lifted him gently. "Yes, Marco," she said, "we won, and you are safe." Lucian stepped closer, placing a hand on Marco's shoulder. The boy leaned into him, and for the first time Lucian felt a lightness he had not known in years. His son, his heart, was safe. And perhaps so was he. They walked together to the balcony, watching the sunrise over the city. The sky was painted in shades of gold and pink, and the mist lifted from the streets, revealing a world renewed. The curse had been pushed back, but Lucian knew it was not gone forever. Still, in that moment, hope outweighed fear. Alara's hand brushed against Lucian's. He did not pull away. Instead, he held it firm and steady, a silent promise that they would face whatever came next together. "You saved more than Marco," he said quietly, his eyes on her. "You saved me." Alara smiled softly. "Then we are both saved," she replied. For the first time, Lucian allowed himself to feel peace. Not because the curse was gone, but because the people he cared about were safe, because he had learned to trust, and because he had finally accepted that love, quiet, enduring, and patient, could exist even in the darkest of places. The mansion, once filled with shadows and whispers, now seemed to exhale, as if it too recognized the shift. The garden beyond glistened in the morning sun, the fireflies long gone, but their memory lingering like the promise of light after darkness. Alara, Lucian, and Marco stood together, three hearts bound by courage, trust, and the trials they had endured. And though the city held dangers still, and the curse waited in shadows unseen, for the first time, they faced the future not with fear, but with hope. The dawn rose higher, bathing the mansion in light. Shadows fled, and the warmth of a new day spread across the city, promising life, courage, and the quiet power of love. And in that rising sun, three lives intertwined, protected, strengthened, and forever changed.